For 60 minutes on Saturday night in Chicago, it looked like it could be another Irish fairy tale on American soil before the All Blacks delivered a fairly chastening final quarter to Andy Farrell's men. Now, he has to pick up the pieces with 3 games to come in November at the Aviva Stadium. And in tonight's episode of The Left Wing, we are going to unpack all the talking points from what was a very eventful Saturday night game. Will Slattery here with you as always. Joining me for tonight's debrief is Luke Fitzgerald. Luke, how are you?
Good, Will. How are you?
I'm doing very well. And Jonathan Bradley back on the show again. Jonathan, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad.
Great to have you back with us, guys. So much to get to. I'm just going to quickly go through, give a bit of a kind of game storyline just to catch people up, because there's been so much chat, big picture chat about the team and the World Cup and where they're going. I actually want to focus a little more on the actual game itself and the 80 minutes for a little bit anyway. Like, obviously, the Tadhg Beirne incident happens after 3 minutes. There's a lengthy stoppage, which we can get into. He ultimately gets the red card. Ireland go 10-0 ahead, courtesy of a Tadhg Furlong try. At that point, Ireland are playing some good rugby. You know, the try in particular was very well worked, kind of Ireland at their best. They give it right back. Lester Fayanga and Nuku gets around Gary Ringrose, throws a lovely offload. Sevilla ends up scoring 10-7 at half time to Ireland. Third quarter, Ireland have a lot of possession, a lot of territory, don't quite take their chances, only get 3 points to show for it. And then the All Blacks kind of kick for home with tries from Tamati Williams, Wallace Satiti and Cam Roygaard, putting a 26-13 final scoreline up on the board. So that's kind of how the game unfolded in a very kind of brief terms, Luke. I'll go to you first. Like, at an hour, as I said, it looked good for Ireland. Like, there wasn't necessarily signs that they would end up getting beaten out the gate. Like, why do you think Ireland ended up getting such a heavy defeat on the scoreboard? What went wrong? What kind of took shape in that second half to leave us where we're at?
I'm not sure that it was all down to being kind of caught cold or undercooked, which is a big talking point pre-game. It probably looks like that if you look at if you look at high level, like where did New Zealand score all their points? You know, it's in the last quarter of the game, really, isn't it, Will? So that maybe leans you towards being undercooked. But I thought they were in a very good position. It didn't look like they were too tired or anything like that. I thought they'd gone past the kind of the challenging part of the game in terms of delivering skills and things like that. I was a bit concerned about that. You know, when you come back from a long layoff, sometimes the passes don't stick. Sometimes, you look a little bit exhausted or the line-out's not working or whatever. And I didn't see any of those things. I thought some of Ireland's key players, stepped up. I thought McCluskey looked very good for parts. He probably overdid a little bit on the offloading, but I thought he was excellent. I thought Jameson Gibbs-Park had a superb game. He was really, really great out there. His kicking was awesome, wasn't it? And Ireland, I probably think went away from something that was working really well for them. I thought they were really good in the air, chasing the ball. And that was a real problem for New Zealand. I thought Ireland got lots of entry into really nice positions on the pitch and had lots of territory off the back of some really great competing in the air. So there was lots of good things to admire about the result, Will. And I think when you look at the final score, the temptation is to stick the boot in. But I'm probably not as negative on this Ireland performance. I think they have a few things that they really need to tidy up. And there was a few, I thought their discipline at the end of the game really fell away quite badly as well. They looked very, very loose. I thought Ryan Baird had a few bad moments, having had a brilliant 60 minutes. He was very poor in the last 20 with his discipline. And the team generally was as well. And I think they missed some bad tackles. I thought there was some really bad tackling at kind of key junctures, and New Zealand really punished them. I thought Gary Ringrose had a terrible miss for the... Was it the Satiti try?
Yeah, he came out and missed Bolton
Same
Barrett,
way,
yeah.
Like he didn't need to come in that far and get disconnected. Now, it worked quite well for him on a number of occasions, but you don't need to keep doing it. And they were well numbered up. And I actually thought James Lowe was poor defensively on a couple of occasions towards the end of the game as well. He got caught in no man's land. I know he's supposed to get dragged up with Ringrose, but he didn't. He didn't. It's a beautiful pass by Bowden Barrett. He just floats it into the space. Once Ringrose misses the tackle, but I think Lowe should probably do a little bit better and kind of block the trail runner a little bit better. Look, my key thoughts on it, Will. I'm not as down on this Ireland team as a lot of people are. I don't think they're finished by any means. I thought there were some positives to take from the game, and I think they'll get better throughout November. I do wish they had one game under their belts. I'd like to have seen a little bit more running in their legs and maybe what that might have done at the kind of key part of the game. I'm still not sure that was an issue, but I thought they played very well, and just some disappointing parts at the end when they kind of fell apart, and New Zealand really picked them apart very, very well. So, that they're my kind of a jumble of thoughts, Will. But
Jonathan, like on some of the points Luke raises, is funny to me, does back up the argument that like a lot of what went wrong on Saturday stemmed from how little matches the team had played. Like Luke says, the discipline went to pot at the last 20 minutes when players are more tired. The defence was worse when players are tired. I just think it's almost like exactly what people are talking. I find it funny that we spend so much time pre-match, not just us, but generally, talking about how little games Ireland had played or the Irish players had played. I think I said it was the most undercooked they'd ever been going into a test match by minutes. Then the final quarter, Ireland lose 19-0. And I think a lot of talking point seems to be just around like the age profile and tactical stuff and the line out, and some of that's valid, the line out in particular. But for me, a lot of it stems from just how little games they had played.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think in some places the debate becomes about fitness and are they lacking match fitness because they haven't played. And I think it's important to make the distinction between match fitness and match sharpness, because these guys are super fit athletes. They did, after the Lions, they probably had a 5-week break. They were back into what was essentially a preseason block, and then one hit out in most cases, and then they're playing test rugby. So it's not that they're not match fit, but I think it's that they're not match sharp. And I think you can see to me, it didn't look like they had been battle hardened for the level of concentration that is required to play test rugby against the All Blacks for 80 minutes. And that's where you saw things dropping off. So I just think in an awful lot of that discourse, it's become about fitness when it's not really about fitness. It's about everything else, that whether it be, I suppose, just mentally preparing yourself and just being used to that environment again that just wasn't there. And that was a big thing for me. The line out was a huge thing for me because you're just denying yourself any sort of attacking platform. You're not going to beat you're not going to win test matches with 70% or less than 70% of your line out. You're definitely not going to beat the All Blacks. And you can see that from the very start. The first line out is a complete mess and ends up with Tadhg Beirne jumping to try and claim a loose ball. Like, that's a terrible sign from the get-go. And again, it's been an ongoing problem that we've talked about an awful lot over the last really 3 years. Ireland struggles with this, and it's odd to me that it's not something that they've been able to get right, even when you factor in the disruption of losing Tadhg Beirne so early, losing James Ryan for that HIA. I thought it was very strange that they weren't able to right the ship in that regard. As good a defensive line out as the All Blacks are, I think that was a big thing. And I know you don't want to talk about the bigger picture stuff yet,
no,
but I
do
think
fire right.
I do think that it's not so much that this game was that bad, as that this game fits into the wider trend of recent games against the All Blacks, recent games against South Africa, with the exception of the Crowley drop goal game, and recent games against France, where they just look like they're a little bit below those teams now. And it looks like that drop off from really the end of the 2023 World Cup is becoming more pronounced as we go, and they're not closing the gap to the best sides. It looks like the gap to the best sides is widening now, and it's through all these games that they're not really, they're getting beat by 13 points, or as it was, against France in Six Nations, where you've got 30-something unanswered points. And it just looks like whenever the very best teams go up a gear, it doesn't look like Ireland are matching them anymore.
Yeah,
it's interesting. Can I jump in there?
Yeah, go for it.
I thought the scrum was probably more of a big disparity than the line out. Like, I thought New Zealand had their own concerns there. Now, maybe it's because Ireland traditionally have had such a strong line out, and it's been a really good launch for Ireland that it's probably talked about more. But to me, the scrum was the bigger issue on the set piece side.
I thought they were both. Gee, I'm surprised. I don't know how you could say the line out wasn't a big issue.
No, but New Zealand had their own problems there. Like, we had a bit of success against them. So for me, there was more parity at line out than there was at scrum, if I'm being honest. Do you know what I mean? If you're asking me what I thought was a bigger issue set piece wise, or a bigger disparity between the teams, that was the one. I thought Ryan Baird actually was very good defensively. He had a couple of lovely steals, I thought, on the New Zealand throws, and they had a few tricky parts themselves in terms of retaining possession. Crooked throws and things like that at key points. So yeah, I don't know. I was surprised that there was so much chat about that. Maybe it's because it's been such a traditional.
Ireland being successful on the New Zealand lineout doesn't change the fact that the lineout is Ireland's probably biggest attacking platform, and it struggled. Like I get your point, as in New Zealand struggled with the lineout, but that doesn't mean that Ireland didn't struggle as well.
Yeah, but my point is that net that wasn't as big an issue in the game. Like, the bigger issue for me was the scrum. Like, the scrum struggled worse. Like we didn't take much off them. There was one for I don't know what in the second half. It was unusual. But I think for most of the first half, we were kind of getting pinged at scrum time again, and that's been a persistent issue as well. I'm not taking away from Jonathan's point about, it seems like Ireland have rallied when they've got criticised around the line-out. They've had a few good ones, but they haven't been able to kind of be really strong there consistently, I think, is probably my bigger issue with that in terms of the team. The scrum, though, is a big... I think that's a problem that we haven't been talking about enough. We seem to be getting pinged off the park there quite a bit. And I do wonder about that. And Porter seems to... Whether it's Porter, I don't know who it is, but, we're not getting the decision when it's wheeling around. It's very hard to see as someone who doesn't know much why that's happening, but you can definitely see that we're getting pinged a good bit versus the top teams. Happened at a key juncture in the World Cup as well. At scrum time, we got pinged a good bit there against New Zealand. So, sorry, I just thought I'd make that was my own view, and it was that was the bigger problem, Will. But it is interesting to hear people talking about the line out so much.
Yeah, no, I take your point. Like, New Zealand got a good few scrum penalties, a couple of relieving ones as well, where they had scrums near their own territory. But Jonathan, just to go back to the line out as well, it's funny because I think I tweeted about the line out being a mess, and Brett Igo, the rugby analyst, responded with some stats from the Six Nations that had Ireland kind of in the 90% in terms of their success rate. But I do think some of those stats can be misleading because Ireland often win their own line out sometimes, but it's still messy ball. Like, it's not like the crisp, clean ball that you can launch attacking platforms from. So
or it's a two, Will, or they've gone to short lineouts and gone to two, which is basically it's not a cop out, but it's a way of saying we're not 100% confident that we've got an advantage here and that we're going to get ball every time. So. You know what I mean? So there is, I completely agree. I think that's a great point on sometimes the data can be very misleading on that, And
I think just because even within that, their line was operating at 69%, but that includes the scrappy wins that they did have. And I think, sort of to Luke's point, the reason why I think we're talking about it so much, and I think the reason why it feels like it's much more, Ireland's struggles at the line felt much more important than New Zealand's struggles at the line is just because they didn't have any other foothold into the game in an attacking sense. We're so used to that being the launch for Ireland's attacks. And when it's not there, you're looking for where else they can make gains in an attacking sense. And New Zealand were able to find other ways into the game, whether it be through what they were doing or whether it be through the fact that the Irish defence was falling off tackles. But it didn't feel like Ireland were able to, beyond the spell just preceding Furlong's try, it didn't feel like Ireland were able to get another way into the game. And I think that's why it felt like it loomed so large, because, the stat about the line breaks, whether it be true or not, I've seen a little bit of pushback that maybe it was, they did actually make a line break in the game and it just wasn't recorded in the stats. But the fact of the matter is that whenever that becomes the sort of dominant narrative of the game, I think that's why it felt like it was such a telling part of the game.
Yeah,
I think. Sorry, Will, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say Jonathan's point. I think he's spot on. New Zealand have the X factor, like Fernanga and Nuku in the first half, creating that try out of nothing that Ireland just don't have. So the lineout needs to fire. I think it's a far greater, as Jonathan said, weapon for Ireland than it is for New Zealand, who were able to get by, even though Ryan Baird, as you said, did pilfer a couple. It's just. And it's funny, it waxes and wanes, the Ireland line. It's not like every single game it's poor, like it was on Saturday, albeit it is a fair bit. I remember in Marseille, Ireland, I think they scored 5 tries, all stemming from lineouts, and that was after the World Cup where they had been criticised for how it had performed. So they can get it right, but no, there's no doubt Paul O'Connell is under a lot of pressure. It's funny, the amount of, again, when I tweeted that at the weekend, the amount of people responding, being like, O'Connell's getting a free ride. If he wasn't as popular and he wasn't as well liked, people, if it was Mike Catt coaching the lineout, for instance, who was getting a lot of abuse in the early stages of Andy Farrell's reign, he would be getting a lot more scrutiny. And I think there's something to that. If it was another player or another coach who isn't as popular as Paul O'Connell, I think people would be a lot more up in arms maybe about how he's doing in that area. But it's a massive it's a massive kind of failing of the coaching team that this is still an issue. The World Cup was 2 years ago, and we're still talking about it. Like it's an area that should be squeaky clean, with a lot of practice and drilling. And I know Tadhg Beirne went off, but they still have a lot of experienced operators there, and it just didn't go well at all. And I just can't believe we're still talking about this. We literally had this conversation like last autumn, and the autumn before. It's 2 years we're talking about.
Yeah, although I would say there's a few. And the only thing mitigant against what I'm about to say is that a lot of these guys play together a lot, but also not a lot of them haven't played that much. So there's a bit of that. Like New Zealand would have been a very well-oiled machine. Like they kind of got a 2 weeks break after being together for a long period of time. So that pack is very well oiled. Like, and I thought the defensive line it was good. It's just the attacking side. Maybe they just weren't gelling because it wasn't all bad throws and things. Like there was missed lifts, there was other things as well, which would suggest possibly a little bit of rustiness as well. But certainly an area they need to improve. To be honest with you, Will, I thought the bigger issue, and this was always going to be key in this game for me, was the bench. I thought the benches were like there was a stark difference between how both performed. I thought the Irish bench, I actually, with the respect, I thought Casey was actually very good. He looked sharp when he came on, but I wasn't. I thought they didn't do great. I thought they gave away a lot of penalties, missed a lot of tackles and things like that. Albeit New Zealand were on top, so maybe there would be a few more missed tackles, but I didn't think they really covered themselves in glories. They didn't get much from the bench, and a team that was a little bit undercooked needed to get a lot from the bench. I thought that was going to be always key about how he deployed those at kind of key points. And I think particularly and it wasn't all the bench's fault. There were some key moments where like that when they get that line out, they decide to go short side. Like that was a key moment. They get put in. James Doe gets put in touch. I thought Crowley, for a guy who's been playing great, that was a bad kick he missed, even though he got one a few weeks, a few minutes later. That was like, there was key moments in the game that Ireland kind of switched off. I thought, I didn't think Finlay Bealham did great for that tackle for the try for the quick tap try, and it was a lovely little bit of deception from New Zealand. The little one arm pop was a lovely. I think it was Cody Taylor, wasn't it? Really, really nice little pop, but. I think it was Ryan and Bealham missed a bad tackle there, kind of 4 meters out, which, if they stopped them, it wasn't a foregone conclusion whether they were getting a try or not. But once he gets through there, you ain't stopping them that close to the line, I don't think, with some of the athletes they have. So I thought they lost a few key battles as well, and they made some bad decisions at key moments, and then delivering the skill. I think Crowley, he's got to get that kick, I think. That wasn't that hard a kick, I didn't think. Now, coming from someone who's never kicked in international rugby, but still, I think a top-class international kicker gets that one and settles the team down. So there was a few moments as well as the bench thing that we probably haven't discussed yet. I think they were important factors as well in determining the outcome of the game, because they needed to have a big impact on the game, and they didn't really.
And in contrast, like the All Blacks bench delivered so much impact. Like their front row, like Tauki Aho, the hooker, Tamati Williams, who scored the try and was very powerful, and their other tight, probably his name escaped me. Like they all delivered a massive impact. Like Josh Lord ended up playing like 80 minutes. He was good in the second row. Like Satiti returned to the form that saw him kind of break out last autumn. Mackenzie and Fananga Anuku, added a lot, both kind of having hands in their tries. So the All Blacks bench, in contrast, and I agree with you, to the Irish bench, really didn't deliver anything of note. Like even Caelan Doris actually was very impactful in his little cameo in the first half. And then when he came on actually in the second half for his proper bench stint, maybe it's just that lack of match practice, he maybe didn't look quite as sharp.
He did one lovely carry. He did one or two lovely carries, but he had one great carry in the first half. A lot of ones where he was really on the edge. I thought discipline-wise, he had a few at rucks who were like,
he looked at the ref a lot.
Competes. Yeah, Ryan Baird had a few bad competes. Henderson had a few bad moments. Wasn't a great showing in that respect. They were eager. They were eager penalties and probably some pressure, on top of that as well. But you kind of hope for a bit more, I think, because it looked like a strong bench on paper, I thought. I don't know what you thought, Jonathan, but I thought it looked like a very strong bench.
Yeah, no, I thought it was. Obviously, there's the disruption with the early red card and stuff, but I agree with everything that you guys have said. And I think, if you look across the board over the weekend as well, like you look at the impact that the England bench made and how impactful they were in taking that game away from Australia and really enhancing things on the scoreboard. New Zealand were the same. Again, that to me sort of plays into what we were talking about earlier, that it feels like the best teams now have that extra gear that they can go to. New Zealand got it from their bench, England got it from their bench, Ireland didn't get it from their bench, and it just felt like another point of difference across the weekend for me.
Jonathan, just to go back to the match itself, like for me, the third quarter, like Ireland had New Zealand on the ropes. I thought they were rattled, New Zealand. I thought they made a lot of errors. Ireland had a lot of territory. So I can't go into for any analysis of the game that doesn't recognise the fact that Ireland were really in the ascendancy, and just with some bad decision making and execution didn't make them pay. Like in a 5-minute period between the 43rd and 48 minutes, this was kind of the run of play. Ireland get into the 22 and are like punching holes. It starts with a scrum on the left wing and they make good yardage, end up going to the right side in the 22. And Crowley Grubber kicks the ball away with kind of men outside him. Will Jordan scoops it up and clears the ball. You know, a few minutes later, they get back in the 22. It's a line out to Ireland. James Lowe gives a little pass to Gary Ringrose. He kind of slips. Dan Sheehan is really late to the ruck. Sevilla just comes straight in and steals the ball, while you have Henderson, Andrew Porter and James Ryan like kind of watching the ruck, waiting for the next ruck to take place. Like that maybe goes to your thing of a kind of a lack of match sharpness maybe. Then like a minute after that, Ireland have a line out in the 10-metre line that gets stolen. And then a minute after that, New Zealand knock on the ball. From the scrum, they go offside and Jack Crowley misses a penalty. That's within 5 minutes in the second half when Ireland are really humming, but they just make nothing count on the scoreboard. They scored a penalty a couple of minutes later. But I thought that was a real kind of pivotal period of the game, that like to have New Zealand kind of on the rack like that, and to kind of between a combination of poor decision making, poor execution, a missed kick, coming away with nothing. I think that was the moment where the game really began to slip away, I thought. And watching it back, it was very frustrating to watch those moments unfold back to back to back to back.
Yeah, I think it's the key moment in the game. And it's maybe why, as much as the red card has been a big talking point, it hasn't been talked about in the sense of being a deciding factor in the game or the telling factor in the game, because Ireland did have this period after half time when they were in the lead, and it felt like against what, let's be honest, regardless of the result of the game, is not a vintage All Blacks team. It's a good All Blacks team, but it's not as good a team as we've seen from them over the past number of years and decades, really. And I think, again, it just all comes back to me for this. The most telling part of this thing is how Ireland didn't look sharp. They didn't look like there was a real clarity of thought in their decision-making processes. And they didn't look like they had the levels of concentration required to play Test rugby and beat a team of this level. And I think the way that they attacked, and the muddled way that they attacked in that sort of period between 45 to 60 minutes, to me, again, just means that as much as Ireland were trying to bat it away in the build-up, and as much as they've sort of tried to shy away from it in the aftermath, it's just that they're not prepared for a test match of this level. Like, look, I know you talked about it last week on the show about your disappointment that this game was first and how it's been allowed to happen again. But I think, again, it's just highlighted the fact that, Ireland only play 10 games a year, regardless of whether they're playing the All Blacks or whoever they're playing. You can't be wasting one by not having adequate preparation. And they went to Portugal last year. They still come out flat. They went to Chicago last Tuesday and they still come out flat. And I think it all, to me, just speaks to the fact that they're not adequately prepared by the provincial schedule anymore. And it feels like they haven't adapted to the fact that the provincial calendar has changed, that you don't have those Heineken Cup games. So you're not playing an Interpro and 2 European games and then going into your camp and then playing Test rugby. And something, I think, has to change, because you can't be, as we said, you can't have 10% of your test schedule where you're not able to put your best foot forward because of your lack of preparation.
I think that was very well put, because the last time Ireland beat New Zealand in November, in a November game, was in 2021 when they played Japan the week before, and it wasn't, they won well, but it was a chance to get their eye in and to kind of just, have that cohesion for the following week. And they'd obviously played a couple of more, provincial games than they did this time around either. But yeah, no, I think you're spot on, and I agree with that. I think if this game takes place in Chicago, the last game instead of the first game, I think Ireland potentially win, because I think when the way they fell away at the weekend, to my mind, has a lot to do with their preparation, as much as there were other issues as well. Luke, what did you think of Jack Crowley's performance? There's one thing that disappointed me in it, and I think it's a lesson he hasn't learned from his last kind of stint as the full-time starter. People might remember the game in Marseille that Ireland won, and early in that game, Ireland were on the front foot. They were putting together phases. They were in the 22, and Crowley grubber kicked the ball away, like looking for a kind of a low percentage score. And I remember afterwards, Luke, you saying, Test rugby is not really about that. Sometimes you just need to like let the game come to you, and when you have momentum, just kind of keep your team moving around the pitch. And I don't think he did that at the weekend. I mentioned the grubber kick early in the second half earlier. Ireland at that stage were still punching holes. They were still varying the point of contact and making headaches for the New Zealand defence. And I just didn't agree with that decision to grubber kick the ball away. Obviously, fresh in his mind was Croke Park and the little chip for Tom Farrell. But Test rugby is different. And I thought the same thing for the Tommy O'Brien chip as well. At that point, New Zealand have just scored to go 14-13 ahead. Ireland, though, do really well to get back into the 22. And you're only a point behind. You just need a penalty to nudge your nose back in front. And for me, that was a very low percentage kick to Tommy O'Brien. Like Cam Roigard was well placed. There was two other All Blacks circling. I thought twice Jack Crowley, and Ireland didn't have that much territory in the second half in the 22. Twice he kind of went for that killer play that I don't think is necessary. I think the team was moving just fine. And I would have liked to have seen a little more, I suppose, I don't know what the word is. Maybe him being a little more reserved, a little more measured, and just trust the players around him and trust that they were making yardage. I don't know what your view on any of that is, if it's making sense.
I think that's probably... I don't think it's too harsh, but it's maybe a little harsh. I do think he probably overdid it a little bit. I didn't have as much problem with the Tommy O'Brien one. Like, he gets his hands to that, and he does that ball finds the ground. Now that could easily have found the ground off a New Zealand hand as well, because that was up to compete with. So for me, that wasn't as bad. What I didn't love really, some of those, Grubber does stand out, but I thought there was some kicks that were poor. I thought he got away with one or two. In terms of New Zealand not capitalising, but there was one spiral he put in that Bowden Barrett really, they were very well positioned. He didn't need to try that. Like, it's okay to keep going to the same tactic if it's working, that kind of way. So I thought what would have been a good thing to do was to find a runner and put it up in the air. We were competing very well and very consistently. We were causing them trouble there, and it was actually one of our only consistent avenues into New Zealand territory, I thought, was via the high ball competes. So I thought he'd one or two of those that he was just a little, he tried something just a little bit too early. I could have found that, could have put the team in better positions maybe by being a little bit more patient and just waiting for a better opportunity to kick a compete, whether that was via Gibson Park or himself. So that was maybe the one of the things I thought, and this is probably harsh. I thought the one off the deck was not good. He should have got that kick. That wasn't that hard a kick for an international 10. Now, it's okay to miss him every now and then, but that was a key part in the game. As you mentioned, I think at that point there might have been 4 New Zealand penalties in a row. We had momentum. We kind of had we had a little bit of success, had a bit of territory, and I kind of felt like that one needed to go over. It was a key part in the game, and would have put us. It would have put us in a different position when New Zealand scored their try as well. We would have been a penalty kick would have got us ahead of them. It would have stopped us, would have taken a little bit of pressure off and stopped them kind of building a bit of a lead, I think, and kept us in touch. So I know we got one a few minutes later, and that could have brushed it over me. But I thought if I was Farrell, I would have said, and then there was one or two other little bits that happened afterwards, and I think that's why he brought Prendergast on. So he hasn't shut off that debate. He probably had an opportunity to do that. For him, it would have been nicer probably to have another, have had a game against Japan before playing New Zealand. So it's probably pretty harsh to judge him. And he has had a great start to the season. But the only thing that's probably saved him is that Prendergast was poor when he came on as well. So, not as well. I didn't think Crowley was bad for the whole thing. I thought he tackled very well, and he did some very good stuff as well. So not all bad from him, but there was key parts where he'd be disappointed. Like, he didn't get to cement, I think, the little bit of a gap that had opened up with Prendergast at the start of the season. And I think that conversation is still going to be live. Maybe not as much, as I said, because Prendergast didn't cover himself in glory, but and he'd won. I thought he'd won. That there was a short line that Osborne took off. Now, it was still a tight pass, but I thought it was a poor pass to Osborne as well. Do you remember the one where he dropped? Like, that one, I think it wasn't a very forgiving pass. He dropped off a little bit and didn't really conserve much space for Osborne. It was bits that I thought Prendergast would have probably been a little bit better at that play. That specific play. It was a nice line by Osborne. Probably still should have held it, but I thought that was another thing that maybe I didn't think was great. So, not the perfect performance.
From that knock on, they hacked clear, and he tried to run it back instead of kicking it. got snagged.
That was a tricky position to be in. I thought he probably should have offloaded to Josh van der Fleer. To be honest, I thought like Josh van der Fleer was ready to get it. He's a bigger man. He probably would have held it up a little bit better. But I understood why he also held on.
It was a great tackle by Holland as well, to be fair.
It was to hang on.
It's like a one-handed snag, and then was able to like hold his force with that one arm. It was actually, I think that's underrated. Like, I think the way it kind of looked, or the way it was kind of framed in your mind's eye, is like, oh, he ran up a blind alley, and it was.
No, he didn't do that.
He didn't. He actually kind of stepped him, and yeah, the snag was very good.
No, I didn't think it was all bad, Will. I still think he gets the chance next week for me.
Oh yeah, I agree. Yeah. And I thought he was a bit of a carry threat as well. He carried the ball a couple of times. I thought he made, like, not overly, and I thought he made he looked robust in that area. So no, I agree with you. Like, I don't think he had his best game. As I said, maybe I seem to be in the minority just from talking to people. I just thought those two kicks I didn't like, because I just thought like the territory was very precious in that game for Ireland, and I thought when they were making, kind of going through the phases, they looked threatening. I would have preferred to see him keep the ball in hand.
New Zealand were giving away pens, Will.
Well, that's what I mean.
Me, I would have been concerned if they, in the World Cup, New Zealand. I know I'm going back quite a bit, right? But if you think about the World Cup, New Zealand didn't really look like they were going to give away many penalties. They looked very comfortable. They were very calm. They defended Ireland very well for long periods of that game, right? But that wasn't really the case on the weekends. They never really looked much of a threat. But New Zealand were over competing. They were trying to finish off the sets too quickly by competing, and they were making lots of errors. And the referee was looking at them thinking, the pictures weren't great for the referee, and you could see there a bit of back chat to the referee, etc. So I thought there was something in that. And if you were, when you're feeling the game at that point, I would have said, do you know what? Not the worst thing to be holding onto the ball, even though it burns your energy levels a little bit more, and you'd like to get quicker results. I thought there was something in that.
That's what I'm getting at. And you're saying that Tommy O'Brien got his hands to that, but I'm saying that, like, okay, he got his hands to it, but it would be such a difficult catch. There was 3 All Blacks around him. I think that's a 1 in 10 play that O'Brien makes.
But it was a difficult catch for the All Blacks as well, Will. Like, they didn't catch it easy either, and he was actually the first man to that. So to me, that's a kick to compete in the 20 when they weren't really going forward. There wasn't a huge amount on, and he does get the call from his winger on his inside.
He takes that kick quite early, actually, in it. Well, that wasn't like a case of running out of ideas and kicking the ball. They were kicking that pretty.
I'm not saying it was the perfect option, Will, but I didn't have as much of a problem with that one, because like a kick to compete 5 meters out from the line with your winger chasing hard, not the worst situation to be in. And remember, those All Blacks, they're not coming at it. It's not. Generally, it's a bad kick if the person is coming onto it quite strongly. Normally, the All Blacks were coming at it from different angles and having to go backwards. So that means they weren't in an unbelievable position to take that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Fair to be fair. You've offered a good rebuttal to my.
It's just that one. The other one wasn't great.
No. Like, look, I'm not trying to slam the guy. I just thought those two moments at the time I didn't agree with. But to be fair, you've offered good perspective on why that was maybe a better decision than I gave credit for. Jonathan, anything out half related you want to come in? Like, I don't. Like, to be fair, we waited a fair bit of time to bring it up. It's not as if it was the key differentiator or the kind of the thing that swung the game. But anything that comes to mind in that regard for you?
Yeah, I do think it's part of maybe just a wider trend in general that we're seeing out halves get used to, that it doesn't feel like teams want these sort of 25, 30 phase attacks anymore, So I think across the game, both, at club level and international, I do think we're seeing a range of out halves looking to kick the ball a lot quicker than they would have normally, and maybe that we would have become accustomed to, Ireland under Joe Schmidt. That would have been viewed as a terrible decision, but I do think it's just part of the way that rugby is being played now, that teams don't seem to want to hold on to the ball for as long as they once did. I think it's important that, and I suppose because there were so many talking points from the game, that it hasn't become this sort of dominant theme, but I do think it's important that we don't fall into this trap again of, if whoever is playing out half has a 6 out of 10 performance, that we think that naturally it should lead to a selection debate the next week. Now, thankfully it hasn't. But whenever you have 2 out halves, I do think there is that danger of, it becomes a weekly thing of who's going to play this week, and I don't think that's good for anyone. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. So I think it's probably encouraging that the narrative hasn't become, is it time to go back to Prendergast?
If you have two out halves, you have no out halves, Jonathan.
That's it. That was the phrase that I was fumbling for that you summed up nicely there.
But I'm with you. I'm intrigued to see Crowley. How he grows into the next couple of weeks. Let's do the Tadhg Beirne thing now, Luke. It was such a kind of a shocking opening to the game. Like, it was kind of a bang bang play. You didn't really see it in real time. Then it goes back and you see the replay. Obviously, the lengthy stoppage at the time, because the ref couldn't see it on the big screen, it was a bit of a joke. Like, he had to go to a little kind of tiny monitor on the side of the pitch. The TMO was kind of feeding him information, and the TMO obviously had a certain view on the incident. Ultimately, do you think he should have been given a red card? What's your view on it?
I do hate the 20-minute red card thing. I'll just start off with that, because that's what the that's the item I'm most comfortable saying about this whole thing. So I was standing where I was with Ian McKinley watching this, and I think both of us thought as soon as we saw the collision that we were like, I think it's a red by the rule book, but it feels really harsh. The one thing that I really didn't like about it was that I know what he's trying to do, but his arm gets in a real unnatural position. It's like a brain fart. It's like a guy who hasn't played much rugby or something. Like, even if he gets his hands up to that outside hand or inside hand up to protect him, like, he still protects himself. But if he gets the hand in, he can still push off if he thinks. Obviously, like Beauden Barrett even said after, he didn't think he was getting the ball. And it's clear Tadhg Beirne didn't think he was getting the ball, but it took in the arm. It was a bad look. And then obviously it hits his face. So, like, I don't know. I think the referee's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. I think really, if you look at the level of the collision, there was one replay where it was kind of it was almost like from behind Beauden Barrett, there was a view, and it looked like Beirne kind of engages quite actively with him, which when you look at the other footage, I didn't think he did that. So I thought it was harsh, but by the letter of the law, I think it's probably the right decision, guys. And I think Ireland were lucky that they have this kind of silly 20-minute ruling. I was really unfortunate. It looked like a guy maybe who hadn't played a huge amount of rugby or something. There was something weird about how he did it. So unlike Beirne, who's such a smart rugby player, and he's so good in the loose. You know what I mean? He's such a good tackler. He's so good over the ball. Like this, he's usually so good at all this stuff, and his technique is excellent. So, I don't know. I think it's a bad position he gets I think it's his right arm into, where it tucks slightly, and once he tucks and there's connection on the head, you're leaving yourself very open to having a decision like we had against him.
Yeah, it's funny. I agree with you. I don't think it's as like it's being made out as this miscarriage of justice, like it was the worst decision of all time, which I'm with you. Was I surprised that it came back red? I was, because the referee's language, he said it was a high level of danger. I thought Tadhg Beirne was somewhat passive in the collision, but I'm with you, Luke, completely. It looked all wrong. Like, it just didn't. The visual looked strange. He was kind of bolt upright. His arm was tucked. There was no arms. Like, I don't think it's a mitigation to say Tadhg Beirne didn't think Beauden Barrett was getting the ball. Like, a defender needs to be alert and needs to get his body into the position to make a tackle. Like, there's decoy lines being run all the time. People don't just go around shoulder charging people in the head because they don't think people are getting the ball. So I think he left himself in an awkward position, albeit I don't know if I agree that it was a high level of danger or a high level of force. So that's where I thought it could have been a mitigation. But the thing is, with the 20-minute red card, I don't think it's a good rule. However, if it's being used, I think this is the perfect application of it. I think this is the exact kind of incident it was brought in for. The Gary Ringrose one against Wales, for me, should not be a 20-minute red card, because he flew in, kind of out of control and accidentally made contact with his shoulder to a head. But that, for me, it should be a red card. The Tadhg Beirne one was kind of, if you watch it in real time, it was kind of like a very different sort of challenge that I think actually does fall into maybe a small kind of number of challenges that could be covered by this rule, because I don't know if Tadhg Beirne deserved a full red card for that challenge. But
tucks the arm, it's over for me.
Yeah,
same as the Freddie's. Did you see remember the Freddie Stewart one was a real contentious one? Do you remember that one a couple of years ago?
Yeah,
Jonathan probably remembers it as well. Do you remember the one? I don't know. Is it Hugo Keenan he collides with, or somebody?
Yeah, it was Keenan. Yeah, it was Keenan.
Yeah. The only thing that means that that leads me to the conclusion that it's illegal and that it should be penalised quite heavily is that you took the arm. you took the arm, you're protecting yourself fully, and you're not protecting, and the other person is you're like a missile heading towards the other person. And Beauden Barrett doesn't go down that easy. Like, he's a pretty tough character. He did go down with it. Like, it was a shot to the head. So, I don't know. As we're talking through it, I think that's the key part for me, is the tuck of the arm. Like, that's where you leave yourself really open. If he doesn't tuck his arm at all, I think he gets away with that one. And it's a lesson for him, you know. It's a real lesson for them, I think, and it's a really harsh one for such a brilliant player. But no doubt he will learn from that. And I do think you're right, though. It's exactly the type of collision that they were trying to mitigate it, kind of completely ruining a game. But I still think it's a red card because he took his arm, and that's it for me.
It's funny. I kind of had forgotten the 20-minute red card for a second. So when they were like, "Oh, red card," and of course he'll be replaced after 20 minutes, I was like, you know what? I don't really mind this rule anymore. I jest, of course. But I had forgotten about it, though. I was like, oh yeah, geez, I forgot that he can actually be replaced. But for once, as I said, like, there's different kind of challenges. That one for me, if you're going to have this rule in place, that's the way it should be applied. Not, in my opinion, in the Gary Ringrose one versus Wales. Jonathan, what's your view on it?
I think that it looks so strange because I don't think it's a tackle. And I wonder if that's where the mitigation comes in, on the basis that the pass is forward. So if the pass is forward, I completely understand what you're saying, Will, about there's decoy runners all the time. But if the pass is forward, then to my mind, Tadhg Beirne has no reasonable expectation to believe that Beauden Barrett is going to get the ball. And if he has no reasonable expectation...
Can he tell that's forward in real time, though, Jonathan? I've heard a few people say this. Like, I don't think it was so blatantly forward, and that it was marginal enough, I thought. Sorry to cut across you. I just wanted to raise that.
I just think the idea that the pass is forward plays into what it looks like to me. And we'll never know for sure. But what it looks like to me is that Tadhg Beirne doesn't think that Barrett's getting the ball. I think he doesn't think that Barrett's getting the ball because he's overran the pass. So he can't, in Beirne's mind, he can't be getting the ball. And the movement that Beirne is making initially is to the ball, towards the ball at the back, which is the tackle that he thinks he's making. So I don't think he's actually making a tackle. I think it's a collision, and I think that's why it looks so strange. And for me, that's why it's a yellow rather than a red. Now, you're banking an awful lot on intent there and being able to gauge intent accurately, which is obviously impossible, but that's what it looks like to me. And I've heard other people make that sort of Freddie Stewart comparison. And if you remember, like, at the time, the big thing that sort of did for Stewart in that situation was that he made a movement towards Keenan. And I don't think Beirne is making a movement towards Barrett. I think he's making a movement towards who he thinks is going to be the ball carrier. And so it's not so much a case that the forward pass negates foul play, because that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is I think that the forward pass is mitigating against the foul play, in the sense that I think it means that Beirne isn't actually trying to make a tackle.
So you think it's feeding into your... Yeah, I'm okay with that. I still think he makes a move towards Barrett, just not a very aggressive one. But I think the key thing is the tuck of the arm. If he, like, so what you're kind of taught to do technique wise,
or the microphone
when I was playing, is to get the hands up, because to get the hands up, it allows you to, so if someone's running a blocking line, you want to get this. So if you're running this way and the guy's coming into you here, you want to get the inside hand in to allow you to get through and help your teammate on the inside. So you get the two hands up, but also what it does is allows you to clamp down. If you're high, which Beirne is in a high position, it allows you to clamp down on the two elbows to stop an offload. So your technique should allow you with that. You should be hands up for me. So once you do that, I'm like, well, you're protecting yourself, and you lose all. I know it's a small thing, but you lose all my any kind of sympathy that I would have for you goes out the window when you tuck the arm. Because it's, you know, it's kind of be damned whatever happens to the other guy, and I'm going to be fine, and it's not a nasty thing or anything like that, but that's, you know, because I don't think there was any nastiness there, but it's protecting yourself fully. Whereas that one, there could be a collision, you know what I mean, on your kind of torso, and the other one kind of blocks it because you can kind of hit in with the shoulder, and it's more dangerous for the opposition player. So, I would disagree with you slightly. I think he does make a slight move towards Barrett. I don't think it's an aggressive one because I think you think you're right. I think he does think he's getting off, but he still makes a slight move towards him. And he hits him in the head with his shoulder. Mm-hmm. So, as a tall guy, he needs to be conscious of that. He's at more risk around the pitch than other players because he's a tall guy. So it feels like I'm digging into him here. It's not a nasty collision, but it's a careless one, and I think it's a red for me.
I don't think you're digging into him at all. I think people are entitled just to view the incident as they see it. Like, I'd be interested to see if he gets a ban off the back of it. Beauden Barrett already came out and said he would gonna go in and defend him, and that might hold some sway. Like, I'd be interested to see if Tadhg Beirne...
Would he have said it if they lost the game?
Well, I suppose if it gets Tadhg Beirne back, I suppose Tadhg Beirne won't mind.
Who cares?
Won't mind too much, I suppose, for the rest of the autumn. Jonathan, though, I do think that how the TMO incident played out impacted the rest of the game. It was such a farcically long kind of thing, and then obviously you had to go to the touchline monitor. Like, there was a couple of other incidents in that game that did not get reviewed. There were no other incidents were actually officially reviewed, which is very strange. But there was a couple of incidents that were like in any other game, be it an international, a World Cup final, or the lowest URC game, would be reviewed. Wallace Satiti knocked the ball on for that go-ahead try. Ian Madigan called it in commentary. The ball clearly rolls on the ground when he kind of gets tackled just short. That was never looked at again. And the Gary Ringrose tackle on Beauden Barrett, I thought, was definitely worth another look. One of the replays, I thought, definitely looked like Ringrose makes contact with Beauden Barrett's chin, and like the TMO weighed him was going all on the ball, but we barely got to see a replay of that as well. And I thought Gary Ringrose might have been a little bit lucky with that one too. And I wonder how much the kind of TMO spectacle at the start, influenced them not going back, because the Satiti one 100% needed to be reviewed, because the ball clearly, I thought, moved. At that stage, Ireland are 13-7 ahead. That means the try is being ruled out and Ireland are getting a scrum. So that was a massive moment. And then I also thought Ringrose was fortunate as well, but I just thought the lack of TMO intervention subsequent to the initial one gave me pause, and I was wondering how much it fed into the fact that we didn't see any other big lengthy reviews because it was such a joke at the start.
But it just felt like there were a number of those maybe small things in isolation that all fed into the fact that this was not the pinnacle of the sport. Like, I thought it was a really bad advertisement for rugby, which is essentially what this is. Like, let's not make any bones about it. It's a money-making exercise, and it's an advert for rugby in the States, whether anyone agrees with that concept or not. But this was, again, not the sport putting its best foot forward. Like, the picture quality was terrible. The replay options were terrible. The TMO thing at the start was a farce, that you have the guy going over on the screen. And again, this all, I read Rory this morning saying that the pitch looked very small. The dimensions of the pitch didn't lend itself to test rugby. I suppose this is not something that we were talking about in 2016 whenever Ireland went there. But all of these things just gave the impression that this wasn't a test match between the second and third best teams in the world. Like, it all felt, to my mind, it all felt very small time, and that was very strange to me, because it's meant to be the sort of glitz and glamour of taking a game stateside. You're showcasing your sport. It's meant to be the team that America will get behind because of the diaspora against the only team that most non-rugby fans will recognize as a rugby team, or the All Blacks. It's meant to have this glamour attached, and the whole occasion just felt flat. And I think that maybe fed into people criticizing the actual test match, which I didn't think was as bad as other people did. I was quite, it wasn't brilliant in terms of quality, but I thought it was quite engrossing, as November rugby sometimes is, in terms of people pitching up at that sort of intensity that they need to be at for the very best games. But that, the lack of the TMO after that, and how the TMO played out at the start, it just, to me, it really sort of soured the spectacle of the game, I think.
I think you're spot on, actually, just about the quality of the game. Like, it's been, I listened to Rudd earlier. Rudd was making it sound like this was the shittest game he'd ever watched. Like, I thought the first half was riveting. At half time, I was watching it with my wife. I just turned around, like, Jesus, this is a proper test match. Like, I felt at half time, I was really enthused and engrossed.
She looked up from her phone. Oh, is it? Yeah.
Yeah. No, she was into it the first half, less so as the All Blacks ran away with it. No, but I'm glad you actually raised that point, Jonathan, because it's been treated as like the turkey of all turkeys, and like rugby Rugby will never get a football in America because this was such a crap spectacle. I was like, Jesus, lads, it wasn't that bad of a game. Certainly it wasn't like the World Cup quarter-final, and there was errors, but I thought it was fairly engrossing. But I am with you on, there was a cheapness to the spectacle. That it's almost like they cut some corners with some aspects of putting it on. As you say, when you think of American sports, you think of like kind of, big production values. And obviously it's not going to be on par with an NFL game or something like that. But God, it did feel quite small time. It felt like a summer tour game in a tier 2 nation in terms of like lack of replays, some of the stuff around the TMO and stuff like that. So
it's sometimes hard to tell on TV as well, but the atmosphere seemed terrible. Like, and again, I think that played into thinking that it was a bad game. Like, I'm sure like Rory and Kane will talk about it later in the week. But if you think about that game situation in Dublin, like, regardless of how well or not well Ireland had played, they were winning 13-7 after an hour against the All Blacks. Can you imagine what that atmosphere would have been like in Dublin? And again, maybe it just wasn't coming across on TV, but again, it had that, feel that this wasn't a game of huge consequence because it just didn't have that intensity. It didn't have the atmosphere. Maybe things weren't as partisan as they would be normally, despite the fact that there were an awful lot of green jerseys, but maybe there wasn't that same level of, I suppose, investment from the crowd. And it all just came across as very flat. And, you mentioned the NFL. There was a fair bit of chat about this idea of the sporting equinox that America was enjoying last week. And if you have so many other options, if you're trying to, preach to the unconverted, like a classic World Series is going on, it's an NFL weekend, college football. I think maybe people over here sometimes underestimate just how big college football is. And it was going head to head with college football in that kickoff slot. The NBA is back. The NHL is back, as anyone who's been following the rugby journalists in America last week will have noted. And you've got all of these things going on. So I just don't see how it will have made an impact. I don't know how it's going to cut through all of those other things that were going on, especially when you turn it on the TV, because let's be honest, the uninitiated are going to be the ones watching it on TV, and it just looked bad.
Yeah, I agree. It looked kind of cheap as a product. Just to circle back to my original point, like that Satiti, that was a knock on. Like, I feel like that's not getting half as much play as it should. Like, it was 13-7 to Ireland when like what I saw was a fairly clear knock on was not looked at. So like Ireland might have won the game conceivably if that had been picked up. I'm not that they deserved to over the 80 minutes, but just in terms of like that was a key moment of the game. Luke, anything of that you want to come in on? Spectacle, TMOs, anything?
Yeah, look, I think it's an opportunity missed because I agree on the spectacle. I think, I actually go a different route with it. I went to the Steelers match here in Croke Park, and if you're trying to get an American crowd, like it's an entertainment product, so it has to look glitzy and shiny, and it has to have some entertainment, particularly in parts where, they're making decisions. More difficult than rugby because, our kind of sports are a little bit different in terms of football, hurling, soccer, and rugby. Like, they're played continuously. There's an aerobic component to our games. It's not like natural. There's some stops, but not natural stops so often, versus kind of American sports where you got your timeouts, etc. Right? But you have to have some entertainment value somewhere. Like, it has to feel like there's something going on. Like, the crowd are looking for, whether it's music, rightly or wrongly, it's your opportunity to do it. And if you're doing it, you've got to kind of adapt to the environment you're in, and you've got to realize what you're up against. I think Jonathan's right that Game 7 is just an absolute all timer, isn't it? In the baseball. So yeah, look, I think they were up against a lot, and I'm not sure. It feels like an opportunity missed for rugby there. Although, as I said, it wasn't a cracker anyway. And if you're going to do it, I'd still rather have both teams playing at the top of their games. So whether that's New Zealand playing one game because they've been off, 2-3 weeks, and Ireland playing one game before that, play it, some, not a dead rubber, but you know what I mean? Some kind of dead rubber like a Japan or whatever. Play one of those games before you play New Zealand so that you're putting out the best product possible. You see a few really special tries rather than kind of a game that both teams looked a bit disjointed at different times, like particularly around, we discussed it at length, but the set pieces and all that kind of stuff was a big indicator of that. And then one team clearly not up to match fitness, I don't think. you've worked me around on that one, Will. I nearly talked myself into that. I think they weren't matched. Like, you think about how all the points were scored, and discipline is always a key indicator of that. Pressure in a game, but also can be fitness levels, because you're making a lot of bad decisions if you feel under pressure. So, I'd say Ireland were not fit enough for this game as well. So, feels like an opportunity missed to round off the point, and I agree with pretty much everything Jonathan said there, and your points too.
Just to clarify, and this is TD knock on, I'm talking about in the build up to Matty Williams' try, not the actual Satiti try when he just ran in under the post. Like, it was a carry just before New Zealand's second try to go 13 ahead is the one I was referring to. Just before we finish up then, Jonathan, I think the team flew back in. I think they landed today. They have Japan on Saturday. Originally maybe the plan was a great win in Chicago, rest the guys ahead of Australia and South Africa, and bloodloads of new guys. Now it's kind of interesting to see what Andy Farrell might do. Like, will he want to keep the cohort of last Saturday in place to give them more game time, so when they play Australia and South Africa, they're really ready to go? I would think a blend was probably the best. I'd like to see maybe someone tried at number 7. Maybe that's Nick Timoney, even though I don't think he's a long-term answer, but there's not really any other 7 options. I'd like to see Jacob Stockdale get a chance. I'd like to see Tom Farrell play at number 13, to be honest. Like, I don't, again, maybe not a long-term answer, but I think he's been playing well, and I don't think Gary Ringrose played well at the weekend. What's your view on how Andy Farrell should go about picking his team on Saturday?
Yeah, there are no long-term answers in that squad, really. Like, those guys that you mentioned, Stockdale's 29, Timoney's 30, and is Farrell 32?
Yeah. 31.
So, for all the talk about, the direction of this team, and do changes need to be made moving towards 2027 as we sort of get beyond the lines and tip towards the World Cup, it's like the age profile of the players that we're talking about as the fringe players isn't really that much better than an awful lot of the players that social media is calling for bouncing out of this team because they're too old and will be, or maybe not too old now, but will be too old for 2027. So I think it puts Farrell in a sort of difficult position, because you're caught between two stools almost. There's so much call for change, but to my mind, there aren't that many young players this season across the provinces that have really put their hand up to say that they're banging down the door for Test inclusion, and even really that they're ready to play Test rugby. Like McCarthy's the prime example. He wasn't considered ready to play Test rugby against Georgia and Portugal over the summer, and then his first caps against the All Blacks. So you need to be showing something in the way that he has over the start of the season for Leinster, I think, to be earning those caps, because Farrell's big on that, the idea that you don't just hand these caps out. In terms of what is best for Ireland for the rest of the autumn, I think that's a really tough question as well, because we spent the last 2 weeks worrying about whether these guys have played enough rugby, and then we're going to be looking at, but can they play 4 tests in a row, because they need to finish strongly across this window. They'll beat Japan regardless, but it's how the selection for Japan sets up your possibility of success against Australia, but more importantly, South Africa. Like, Australia against England looked like they were a team run out of gas, that they just played too much across the year with the Lions series as well as the Rugby Championship. Admittedly, they will get those, it was an out of window test, so they will have 4 guys back for Ireland, headlined by Skelton, obviously. But South Africa becomes the big one. So it's, how do you best prepare yourself to beat South Africa? I think it's probably by making a number of changes and then going back to what you view as your best 15 for Australia and South Africa. I don't think there's still that many questions around what he thinks his best 15 is. I think Baird probably nailed down the 6 shirt for those 2 tests at the end of the window. McCluskey was obviously very strong, is now injured. Is he going to be fit? Certainly not for this week, but for Australia to hold on to that 12 jersey. And I don't see many more changes being made for Australia. So I think it's just resting, or not resting, because again, they haven't played enough rugby to be rested, but keeping players fresh that you think will need that for Australia and South Africa. But we talk about the bench impact on Saturday, and you look at the rest of the squad, it doesn't feel as deep as it has done in recent times. Maybe that's a bit of an overreaction on the back of the bench, not making the impact that would have been hoped against New Zealand. But I don't think there's an awful lot of people making undeniable claims to be starting.
And it's Groundhog Day. Last November in that New Zealand game, I think it was 23-13. I think Ireland were leading 13-10 early in the second half and didn't score again. And people were, I don't know if people remember, the bench impact that day was really poor as well. Like the bench came on and made loads of errors. I remember Kieran Frawley probably headlining that infamously, but it was kind of similar. People were having, those conversations. Luke, what's your reckoning on how he should approach Saturday? Like, I'm kind of with Jonathan. Like, I don't really see this plethora of options to really freshen up the team without kind of feeling kind of handing out caps for the sake of it. Like but I don't think it's handing out.
I don't think it's handing out caps. I don't think so, Will. I think you're still better off having two old guys. When you talk about Farrell, some of those names we had, like I'd rather have two than one. Like I think what you're going to get from Gary Ringrose. So I don't see any reason not to give Tom Farrell a little bit of a shot in the jersey, get a bit more comfortable, like let him run through some of the plays in there. Like he's 32, but he hasn't got massive miles on his clock, I don't think. So, he could still be in quite good shape around the World Cup in a couple of years' time. So I don't see, that being a massive issue, and just having, he might be a guy that you could bring along. And I like having Stockdale back in. He's been playing well, so I like rewarding someone who's played well at the start of the season. I get the point on the age profile, I do, Jonathan. But for me, I don't think it's just handing out caps, Will. To your point, I think it's developing a little bit of depth and getting guys comfortable with the setup. I think one thing we have learned about World Cups is that you need to be comfortable with bringing in a few guys and having a few extra guys who are actually experienced or have played a lot of rugby in their career, but are still fresh enough in an Irish jersey. I don't think it's a bad thing.
Yeah,
and I didn't mean
like Stockdale and Tom Farrell would be handing out caps. I mean, like outside of maybe 2 or 3 or 4 guys who are ready to come in. Changes in excess of that going deep into the squad, I think would be just changes for change's sake, because I think there's only probably a handful of guys outside of who played last weekend that I think would actually be impactful to play against Australia or South Africa. Stockdale is one of them.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, I agree with that. So, look, I was great. Like, I mean, we barely talked about Paddy McCarthy. Like, I mean, that was a great introduction for someone like him and good recognition of some good early season form. And that's been an area where we've been very concerned about. So, regardless of how it went, and I don't think it went badly or anything like that, or too badly, certainly, for him to feel the next level up and that power, I mean, that's still a very big New Zealand front row, to feel them around the pitch. I think there's some benefit for him in that. I think he grows from this November international period where hopefully he gets a few more opportunities and maybe an opportunity scrummaging against that South African pack. So these are all good learning opportunities for a young prop. And I like one thing I would say about changing your squad over. You don't need to have wholesale changes. Like 2 a year would put this squad in a very different position, or one, even 1 or 2 really good ones sprinkled around. So, and I see some people who could make an impact. Like I think Izuchuku over this. I think Gleason's a guy who's a young guys who could still make an impact or have, I think maybe big Ireland futures ahead of them. So I'm not as panicked about this age thing. And I think people are over egging, how much change you have to have and having to have it all now. Do you know that kind of way? I think you can let it probably play out a little bit more naturally. I would like to see a little bit more of these guys coming through our system and seeing a few more obvious ones. But remember, Tommy O'Brien's come into that team as well on the weekend. So there's still 1 or 2 guys that have made an impact there. And I still think, McCluskey's obviously an older player, but, bringing himself and or Henshaw or Aki, I still think we have enough in there to have a strong bench player that you could kind of carry a couple of older players if you have really, really top quality guys on the bench who deliver for you. They don't have to deliver for as long. So and age, of course, is still just a number. So some guys will still be in good shape then. Just a point in that, because it is important that we touch on that, because there's been a lot of panic talk around, I think, around this squad being done. I think that's far from the truth.
Well, yeah, I will. At the very least, I want to wait until the end of November before I make my judgments on whether I think the team is in steep decline. It was the first game, as we mentioned. It wasn't. We analysed areas we think they weren't great, but I do want to see them play their next 3 games, and you'd like to ideally see them if they're playing similarly against South Africa as they did against New Zealand. Then I will say, okay, there's issues there that maybe they do need to address in a little more depth, because I do think you'd hope that they're going to be better by game 4 than they are by game 1. Albeit that didn't happen last year. They reported.
Is the better barometer not the Six Nations, Will? Oh, I don't know about you, John. Any thoughts on that? I think Six Nations is a better barometer of where this team will be. I think, um, this is kind of a funky one with so many Lions, Irish Lions. I think this is a funky little period, Will. And remember, so some of them will have played 2 games after this one. I think he'll probably rest one or two of them, and then they're coming into their third and fourth game of the season. Now they should be up and running by the fourth game against South Africa, but like the Aussie one is a tricky fixture now. They've got off to a pretty shabby start. They're still pretty battle hardened. That could be a tricky fixture for Ireland, and we've had so many guys who are only just starting their season now. So if I would caution, I would recommend caution on judging this team so early in November. I think Six Nations is actually a better barometer for us to go, okay, it's time to panic now. We need some new ideas. We need some, we need new players. Things like that. I think that's a better place to judge this team. Just a thought, just when what you said, it jumped out at me.
France away in the first game will give us a quick test of where we're at. Just very last thing before we go, I just want to quickly shout out possibly the worst set of predictions anyone has ever made about a rugby match. I sent this tweet an hour before kickoff on Saturday evening. I said 6 predictions for tonight. Number 1, Ireland to win. Didn't happen. Number 2, Tadhg Beirne to have a big performance. Sent off after 3 minutes. Number 3, Jordy Barrett to have a big performance. Think he tore his ACL. Number 4, Jack Crowley to have a big performance. Possibly not his best day. Number 5, Will Jordan to score a try, which he didn't do, albeit he was close. And number 6, Stuart McCluskey to have a big performance, which he did. So I got 1 out of 6.
He did.
Thankfully, I got 1 out of 6. But after 10 minutes, when Byrne had been sent off, when Jordy Barrett had been stretchered off and Crowley had a poor enough start, I was like, oh, I feel McCluskey and Jordan, something bad might happen to these guys.
At least you got to do it online. I was speaking at an event where I was like, Byrne could be the key guy today.
Yeah. So people were giving me a lot of grief on social media for my terrible predictions, and rightly so when I got that one so wrong, but all in good fun. Luke, Jonathan, thanks so much for joining me. It's going to be great fun this November dissecting all the talking points. Thanks so much for everyone for listening. We'll be back next week. Until then, see you later.